Hello everyone. In today's video I bring you an exciting and transformative story. Let's meet Delphine Hawthorne, a woman who faced rejection, abandonment, and pain since childhood, but who, in the midst of despair, had a near-death experience that changed everything. During her NDE, she encountered Jesus in a way no one had ever imagined, and received a powerful revelation about God's unconditional love. What she saw and felt will challenge everything you believe and warm your heart. So, before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. Now, prepare yourself for a journey of hope, overcoming, and divine discoveries. My name is Delphine Hawthorne, and my story doesn't begin with fairy tales. On the contrary, it is marked by rejection, abandonment, and pain. I was born in Asheville, North Carolina, a city known for its serene mountains and crystal blue skies, but my life never reflected that peace. My father left me before I even formed any memories of him. To him, I was an unwanted liability. My mother, on the other hand, had her own battle with addiction and trauma. She tried for 6 months, but in the end, she decided that I wasn't part of the future she wanted to build. I remember hearing my grandmother tell the story of the day I was found. A neighbor heard the crying and saw you wrapped in old cloths, next to garbage bags. He brought you to me. You were just such a little baby. His voice always trailed off at that part. It was a miracle that I had survived that abandonment. My grandmother did the best she could, but she was already a tired woman, carrying the weight of a difficult life. She took care of me until I was 7, but her nerves began to give way. When she suffered a nervous breakdown, I was sent to live with religious relatives. In that house, the Word of God was law, but not in the loving or compassionate sense that many believe. It was used as a weapon, a justification for the severe punishments we received. A simple mischief was a reason for long sermons and punishments that left marks, both on the body and on the soul. Once, after accidentally knocking over a glass cup, I heard my uncle shout, "You are a walking sin. God will judge you for this." I was only 9 years old. I grew up believing that God was a vengeful being, always ready to condemn me. I learned to fear him, but never to love him. This fear shaped the way I saw myself in the world. I felt like a mistake, someone who would never be worthy of anything good. As the years passed, I carried these beliefs and the invisible wounds that came with them. My childhood, which should have been a time of discovery and innocence, was marked by fear and crushing loneliness. I didn't know these feelings would follow me, growing inside me until I couldn't stand them anymore. Adolescence should be a time of discoveries, deep friendships, and dreams for the future. For me, it was a desert. When I moved to a new house and a new college and a new life at 13, I thought for a moment that maybe things could get better. But loneliness accompanied me, like a shadow that I couldn't shake. Living with religious relatives was difficult, but leaving that environment didn't make my life any easier. At 14, I finally started living with another distant, less oppressive, but emotionally absent family. There was no physical abuse, but there was no affection either. They gave me shelter and food, but affection? This was a foreign concept to them, and, consequently, to me. At school, I was the quiet girl, the one who sat at the back of the room, with clothes that didn't match and the look that always seemed distant. I didn't fit in. It wasn't like the girls who gathered in groups to gossip, or the boys who laughed in the hallways. No one seemed to notice my presence. When they noticed, it was to make jokes or cruel comments. I remember one particular day in the cafeteria when I heard one of the popular girls comment, "She looks so sad all the time. Have you ever seen her smile?" They laughed, as if my sadness were a joke. I didn't respond, but those words stayed with me. Was it true? Did I never smile? Without emotional support at home and without friends at school, I threw myself into books. It was the only way to escape a reality that suffocated me. I started writing diaries too, pouring into words everything I couldn't say out loud. I wrote about my loneliness, my fears, and my hopelessness. As the years passed, the distance between me and others only grew. I watched my classmates advance, graduate, make plans for college. Meanwhile, I felt ashamed of my lack of direction. I dropped out of school before finishing high school. I didn't see any point in continuing, and in fact, I didn't believe my life could be any different. At 17, the world seemed to have given up on me. The loneliness I felt at that time was like an invisible wall, separating me from everyone and everything. I tried to ignore the weight, but it only grew. When I turned 20, I expected something, anything, to change. Maybe I would find a job that gave me purpose, or someone who saw value in me, but life seemed determined to drag me deeper. After dropping out of high school, I took the first job that came my way, waitressing at a restaurant in downtown Asheville. The work was hard, and the pay was minimal. Customers rarely noticed who I was other than the person bringing them their coffee. My coworkers were cordial, but they never became friends. And the management? Well, they only noticed when something went wrong. Loneliness, which was already a constant in my life, seemed to be stuck to my skin. I came home every night to a small apartment I could barely afford. The silence in the place was deafening, so I turned on the TV just to pretend I wasn't so alone. I began to seek comfort in alcohol. At first, it was just a glass of wine to help you sleep. Then two. Soon, the nights became a blur, accompanied by a collection of empty bottles in the corner of the kitchen. Mornings were filled with headaches and a growing shame at being unable to control my own life. There were attempts to escape this miserable routine. I was looking for love, or what I thought was love. I went on dates that always ended in disappointment. The men I attracted seemed to see my fragility as something they could exploit. After each breakup, I felt like a piece of me had been ripped away. And so, the years passed. I became increasingly isolated, both emotionally and physically. Instead of seeking help, I sank deeper into my addictions. I started using sleeping pills, which I often mixed with alcohol. Why am I here? What's the point of all this? These questions echoed in my mind every night. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that things could get better, a part of me had already given up. At 27, I hit rock bottom. The darkness inside me was so great that it felt like a bottomless hole. Every morning, I wondered if it would be easier to just disappear. It was at this point that I started planning. It wasn't something impulsive. I knew exactly how, when and where I would do it. The idea of finally ending the pain seemed almost comforting. Deciding to take my own life was, in some ways, the most organized decision I have ever made. There was a strange kind of peace in knowing that the pain would end, even if the price was high. I spent days thinking about the details. I didn't want anyone to have to meet me at home, so I chose the abandoned train station on the west side of Asheville. It was an isolated place and with no cameras, no onlookers, just the rusty tracks and the silence. I remember the night like it was yesterday. November was already bitterly cold, and the streets were almost deserted. I walked for about 20 minutes to the station. With each step, I felt the weight of my despair mixed with a strange sense of relief. Finally, it would all be over. When I arrived, I sat on one of the broken platforms, watching the tracks disappear into the darkness. It was so quiet I could hear my heart beating. But even there, as I contemplated my decision, something inside me hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe that someone, somewhere, would care. Will anyone miss me? This question crossed my mind, but I quickly pushed it away. Of course not, I thought. I was a nobody. It was at that moment that I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, irritated, thinking someone was going to interrupt what I was about to do. It was Evangeline, a coworker I barely spoke to. She was out of breath, as if she had been running to catch up to me. Delphine, what are you doing here alone? The concern in his eyes was genuine, something I hadn't expected. I tried to shake her off by saying I just needed some air, but she didn't believe it. Something is wrong. Please let me help. It was then that my phone rang. I looked at the display and saw my mother's name. For a moment, my heart sped up. Maybe that was it. Maybe she finally wanted to make things right. I answered, hoping to hear something that could save me. But instead I heard cold, distant words. Don't call me anymore, Delphine. I can't deal with you. It was the last straw. I felt an anger and sadness that consumed me. I left there with Evangeline, but my mind had already closed. Nothing could stop me. As Evangeline drove, trying to get me home, everything around me seemed to be in slow motion. The streetlights passed through the car's glass and creating soft reflections inside, but I barely saw them. I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Pain, rejection, despair, all overwhelming me at once. Delphine, please talk to me, she said, trying to snap me out of my trance. I heard her, but her words couldn't penetrate the wall I had erected. At that moment, I had already decided that my pain was irreparable. I looked out the window. The street was empty and dark. The silence between us was almost as heavy as the weight on my chest. Evangeline, thanks for trying, I murmured, without looking at her. Before she could respond, my hand reached for the door handle. Delphine, what are you doing? Her voice rose, but it was too late. I opened the door and threw myself out of the moving car. The fall was quick, but the impact was devastating. My body hit the cold concrete hard. I heard the sound of the crash, like breaking wood, and felt a searing pain in my head. Then everything went dark. I don't remember what happened in the next few seconds. What I know is that, suddenly, I was standing, looking at my own body lying on the floor. It was a surreal sight. My hair was spread like a crown around my head, and there was blood running down the concrete. Evangeline was outside the car, kneeling next to me, screaming my name, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't feel anything. Not pain, not fear, nothing. It was as if I were floating, as if something invisible was holding me. When I tried to get closer to Evangeline, I realized I couldn't touch her. My body, or whatever it was at that moment, felt light, as if it were made of wind. It was then that a light appeared. It was not an ordinary light, like that from lamps or the sun. It was warm, welcoming, and it seemed to call to me. I couldn't resist, and I was drawn to her, as if I were being pulled by a greater force. When I crossed that light, I was transported to a place that didn't seem like this world. The pain completely disappeared, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. When I walked through that light, everything around me changed. There was no longer darkness, cold streets, or the metallic smell of blood. Instead, I found myself in a place that I cannot fully describe with human words. It was like being surrounded by heavenly music, something so beautiful it almost made me cry. The light around me didn't just illuminate, it had a texture, as if it embraced me and entered every cell of my being. It was golden and soft, but intense enough to fill the entire space. I looked around me and realized that there was no ground or horizon, just an infinity of colors and energies that seemed alive. Suddenly, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Love, not a human, conditional or fragile love, but something greater, purer. It was as if I were a child being rocked by a loving father. All the pain, all the suffering I carried for years was ripped away from me in an instant. As I tried to understand where I was, a presence appeared. At first, he couldn't make out who or what it was, but as he got closer, the figure became clearer. It was him, Jesus, but it wasn't the Jesus I had learned to fear in my childhood. He didn't seem distant or stern. He was light, peace, love, and warmth. His appearance was both simple and majestic. His eyes, oh, those eyes, conveyed such deep compassion that they seemed to see every part of me, every mistake, every moment of despair. Delphine, he said, and just hearing my name in his voice was enough to make me cry. But my tears weren't of sadness. They were of relief, as if every weight I carried had been lifted from my shoulders. He reached out his hand, and when he touched mine, I felt a wave of energy go through my being. You are loved. It always was. Always will be, he said, smiling. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. He seemed to understand my thoughts, as he responded before I could ask any questions. There's nothing wrong with you, Delphine. There never was. You are mine. Those words began to crumble the beliefs I had held since childhood. This was not the punishing God I was taught to fear. He wasn't there to judge me, but to welcome me. I knew I was in a sacred place, a heavenly dimension where everything was peace and love. And at that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. I was still enveloped in that golden light, feeling a love that seemed to transcend anything I had ever known. Jesus stood before me, his presence so powerful and yet so gentle. He held my hands, but the touch wasn't physical. It was like he was touching my soul. Why me, Lord? Why would you care about someone like me? I finally managed to ask. My voice sounded small and unsure, like a child's. He smiled, a smile that seemed to light up the entire space around me. Because you're mine, Delphine, he replied. You always were. I saw you in every moment of your life, even the most difficult ones. I was there, even when you thought you were alone. His words hit me deeply. Everything I believed about God and myself seemed to start to crumble. I had grown up believing in a distant God who judged every mistake, who expected me to be perfect enough to be worthy of love. But there, in front of me, was Jesus, saying the opposite. He started showing me visions. It was like watching a movie, but a movie that felt as real as my own existence. I saw people who, in my mind, would never be accepted by God, a prostitute walking the streets, a skateboarder with tattoos and a cigarette in his hand, a businessman with an air of arrogance. And yet each of them was enveloped in the same light as me. I love them as I love you, Jesus said, his voice full of tenderness. My love has no conditions. It doesn't depend on who you are or what you've done. It simply exists, because you are my creation. I remained silent, absorbing the depth of those words. Tears streamed down my face, but this time, they weren't from pain or sadness. They were tears of relief, of liberation. You don't have to be perfect to be loved, Delphine, he continued. You are already good enough because you were created in love. I wanted to stay there forever, in that presence, in that peace. But deep down, I knew that meeting had a greater purpose. He wasn't finished yet. Jesus looked at me once again, his eyes filled with a wisdom that seemed infinite. There's something you need to do, Delphine, he said. But first let me show you more. It was then that other figures began to appear, angels, or at least that's what they appeared to be. They were radiating light, each with a unique energy. Two of them began to approach me, while Jesus remained silent, as if preparing me for what would come next. As Jesus stood beside me, two figures emerged from the surrounding light. They were angels. I had no doubt about that. But they were not like the images I had seen in paintings or religious descriptions. One of them had an almost human appearance, dark skin, intensely blue eyes and short hair, as if he were a longtime friend who had always been with me. The other was ethereal, surrounded by a golden aura that seemed to pulse gently, almost like the fluttering of invisible wings. Delphine, the human-looking angel said, her voice carrying a tone of calm and authority. You think your life has been nothing but suffering, but everything you've been through has taught you important lessons. Your journey isn't over yet. I was confused. Why me? What do I have to offer? I'm nobody. My voice broke, revealing the fear and insecurity that still accompanied me. The golden angel spoke then, his voice like music, sweet and reassuring. You have more strength than you know, and your story is a bridge to others. Those who are lost need to hear what you experienced. They need to know they are not alone and that they are deeply loved, just as you are. I felt a heat run through my being, but at the same time, a resistance. I don't know how to do this, I confessed, looking to Jesus for guidance. He just smiled, with that same expression of unconditional love. You will know, he said, because you will be guided, and because the love you felt here will never leave you. The angels began to show me visions of my life. It was like watching a movie, but a movie in which I was the protagonist. I saw my difficult childhood, the moments of pain, the nights I cried alone. But surprisingly, I also saw flashes of small victories, moments of kindness that I had forgotten about, like the time I shared my lunch with another child at school, or the time I held the hand of a classmate who was crying. Every little act of love counts, said the golden angel. You were planting seeds without even realizing it. Then came the most impactful moment. I found myself at the train station, about to end it all. But this time, the vision was different. I could see a glow around me, as if an invisible force was trying to hold me back. And I realized I wasn't alone. The human angel was there, watching over me. I've always been with you, he said, looking into my eyes, and I always will be. I felt a mixture of emotion and purpose rise within me. So what do I do now? I asked, voice shaking. The golden angel replied, come back. Tell everyone that God loves them. No judgment, no conditions, just pure love. I looked to Jesus once again, seeking final confirmation. He nodded, his expression full of trust and tenderness. Go, Delphine. The world needs to hear this. You're not alone. Suddenly, I felt a force pulling me. It wasn't aggressive, but it had urgency. The light around me began to fade, and the presence of Jesus and the angels became more and more distant. I wanted to resist. Please don't make me come back, I begged. There, I was free from all pain, completely enveloped in love and peace. But then, I heard the voice of Jesus again. It was soft but firm. Delphine, you need to go back. They need you. My message will be your strength. Before I could respond, I was enveloped in a whirlwind of energy. I felt like I was falling, although there was no fear. When I opened my eyes, I was greeted by the cold light of a fluorescent lamp. I was in a hospital room. My vision was blurred, and my body felt heavy, as if it were bound by invisible chains. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. The physical pain I felt was intense, but nothing compared to the emotional relief that still pulsed through me. I heard voices around me. "She's waking up! My God, she's waking up!" A nurse appeared, and soon after, Evangeline. Her face was lined with worry and tears. "Delphine, you're back," she said, holding my hand tightly. My mind was still confused, trying to process what had happened. "How long have I been here?" I asked, my voice hoarse and weak. 2 days, Evangeline replied. "You were in a coma. The doctors didn't know if you were going to make it. They said it was a miracle." A miracle. I knew exactly what had happened. The memories of the celestial dimension were still vivid in my mind. The words of Jesus and the faces of the angels remained as clear as if I were still there. The days that followed were of physical recovery, but spiritually, I was already a new person. Something inside me had changed. The loneliness that accompanied me for so many years seemed smaller now, not because all my problems were gone, but because I knew for sure that I would never be alone again. I began to share what I had experienced with Evangeline, who heard every word with teary eyes. "Delphine," she said, "you have to tell this story to the world. It could save lives." Evangeline was right, but before doing that, I knew I needed to start my own life over. I needed to heal. My physical recovery was slow, but with each passing day, I felt stronger inside. It wasn't just the pain in my body that was lessening. It was as if a fog had been lifted from my soul. The words of Jesus and the teachings of the angels echoed in me every moment. "You are good enough because you are loved," he had said, and that truth now became the foundation of everything I did. When I finally left the hospital, I encountered the world differently. The streets of Asheville no longer seemed so cold and indifferent. Even the sky, with its gray winter clouds, seemed to welcome me. For the first time, I looked at the people around me with a feeling I hadn't known before. Compassion. It wasn't just about me. Everyone, every person I saw, carried their own pain, their own struggles, and everyone was deeply loved, even if they didn't know it. I decided I needed to change my life. Working as a waitress no longer made sense. I quit my job and looked for something that would connect me with the purpose the angels had shown me. That's how I started working with special needs children in a community center. Taking care of them was not just an occupation. It was a way of experiencing the love I had experienced. But it wasn't just my career that changed my life. I started looking for ways to share the message I received. I wrote about my experience, not to seek fame, but to reach those out like me who were lost. I participated in support groups for people dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts, offering my story as proof that darkness is not the end. I remember one encounter in particular. A young woman of about 20 listened to me tell my story with tears streaming down her face. When I finished, she hugged me and said, "I needed to hear that. You just saved me." It was at that moment that I fully understood my mission. Today, I live with a sense of peace that I never thought possible, not because my life is perfect, but because I know I am loved unconditionally, and I know we all are. My message is simple but powerful. God is not judgment, God is love, no conditions. And if you're reading or listening to this right now, I want you to know, you are deeply loved, just as you are. If you liked this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.